Silence hurts more than any word. This is the brutal truth that almost no one wants to admit. And if you understand it today, you will never again be manipulated, humiliated, or placed in the role of a supporting character in someone else's story. Because silence is not absence, it is selective presence, it is invisible authority. And when you learn to use it to close the door for good, the other side never recovers. We have all been taught to believe that dialogue solves everything, that it is necessary to talk for relationships to work, that we should give one more chance when someone apologizes, and that ignoring is immature. But this belief is the secret weapon of toxic people. It is the crack through which they return, repeat the emotional game, and continue draining your energy. What no one tells you is that the most lethal weapon against manipulation is not shouting, not explaining, and much less begging. It is strategic silence. It is cutting off emotional, physical, and mental access. It is becoming inaccessible in such a definitive way that, on the other side, all that remains is the sensation of irreparable loss. Closing the door is not about punishment. It is about liberation. It is the conscious decision that protecting your peace is worth more than maintaining any tie that has already made you bleed emotionally. And the most shocking part? You don't have to say anything for it to work. In fact, the less you speak, the louder your absence screams. When you disappear from the radar of someone who was used to having you always available, something curious happens. First, they think it's temporary. Then, they start to get bothered. And finally, the ego begins to crack, because their mind cannot handle the idea that you moved on without giving them an explanation. It is at this point that silence stops being mere absence and becomes poison to the ego. It corrodes slowly, every day, until that person realizes they no longer have control over you. And this is a blow from which they will never fully recover. What we are going to explore here is not empty theory or shallow motivational phrases. It is psychological strategy based on Stoic principles, but applied to the real world, where manipulative, narcissistic, and controlling people try to use every crack you offer to come back and take control. You will understand why forgiving does not mean reopening the door. You will discover how subtle and consistent boundaries silence more than any fight. You will see how intelligent humor can dismantle the other's authority over you. And above all, you will learn to refuse the emotional game before it even begins. But attention, strategic silence is not for the weak. It requires self-control, personal focus, and inner strength to deal with the temptation to return, explain yourself, or prove that you are fine. It is resisting the urge to respond to provocations and remaining firm even when the other tries to use guilt as a weapon. This is the kind of transformation that changes not only your relationships, but also the way you see yourself. Because deep down, every time you close the door on someone who does not respect your boundaries, you are making room to build something much greater for yourself. And here comes the most controversial part. It is not just about protecting yourself. It is about allowing the other to feel without filters the impact of losing access to you. Because only then will they understand, once and for all, that the time for games is over. If you are tired of being manipulated, ignored, or disrespected, this video is the turning point. We will break down step by step the beliefs that keep you stuck in the cycle, expose the invisible mistakes that weaken your authority, reveal the psychological consequences that silence provokes, and give you practical strategies to shield your life for good. And the best part? All of this without needing confrontations, dramatic speeches, or noisy revenge. Just with discipline, clarity, and a weapon no one expects: your absence. If you want to learn to use silence as a form of emotional dominance, to close the door for good, and to see with your own eyes how those who disrespected you will never recover, stay with me until the end. Because now begins the journey where every unspoken word turns into power, and where every closed door makes room for your true freedom. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of the next lessons. Today we are going to start with the first step of this strategy, where you will discover why forgiving does not mean giving a new chance, but rather ending the game before it even starts. Forgiving is not about absolving. It is about regaining emotional control and closing the door forever. It is the silent liberation that dismantles manipulation and destroys the ego of those who believed they would always have access to you. Most people confuse forgiveness with reconciliation. This is the trap that keeps thousands of people stuck in the emotional game of toxic individuals who apologize only to keep the cycle of control going. Real forgiveness is a calculated absence. You say okay internally, but you cut off access, withdraw attention, and install unshakable emotional coldness. The person feels it, but does not understand. And that is part of the silent revenge. It is not revenge out of anger, it is silent justice. It is using strategic silence as the final sentence. The other expected forgiveness as a password to come back in, but receives only a locked and bolted gate. This closure is the first demonstration of personal power. It shows that your firm boundaries are non-negotiable. It is a guilt-free withdrawal, because you have already done your part. Forgive to free yourself, not to relive. Those who live by manipulation do not know how to deal with silent authority. When you do not react, justify, or explain, they lose their most lethal weapon, the certainty that you would always return. The impact is brutal. Strategic silence turns into strategic disappearance that erodes the other's sense of security. And this is even more devastating when it comes with a calculated absence that will never be broken. Toxic people hate losing emotional control over their victims. When you withdraw attention and ignore attacks, you break the cycle that sustained the relationship. Without that fuel, the emotional game collapses. Forgiveness without reopening is a silent humiliation. They realize their apologies have lost value, that no matter the theater of repentance, the door is closed and they will never recover. This hurts more than any confrontation, because there is no discussion, no explosion, no explanation, only emptiness. And that emptiness is a sentence of ego destruction. The secret lies in self-control. It is resisting the temptation to go back to give one more chance. It is maintaining emotional coldness even when the other's wounded pride tries to pull you back. By not reopening the door, you redefine the narrative. The power shifts sides. You make it clear that you are not a supporting character in anyone's script. You are the protagonist, with personal focus and inner strength. Calculated absence has a cumulative effect. At first, they try to contact you subtly, then they resort to provocations. When they realize nothing works, they feel the weight of guilt-free withdrawal. Every ignored message is a silent reminder. Access is over. Every failed attempt at manipulation is a blow to the ego. Every silence of yours is proof of silent authority. Not reopening the door does not mean living bitterly. On the contrary, it means living light, without the weight of broken expectations, without exhausting comings and goings, without promises that are never kept. It is here that you realize that forgiving is not making yourself available again. It is closing the chapter and not allowing the plot to be rewritten by someone who has already hurt you. Strategic silence after forgiveness is the final period that many do not have the courage to place. But when you do, you experience an emotional freedom that no forced reconciliation can offer. The other's reaction is predictable. First, shock, then anger. Next, desperate attempts to re-establish contact. And when none of that works, the most painful phase begins, accepting that they have lost access forever. This is more than cutting physical or digital access. It is cutting emotional access. It is preventing your emotions from being used again as puppets in an emotional game. Emotional coldness is not cruelty. It is self-protection. It is self-respect in action. It is understanding that you do not need to give another chance to prove you are a good person. When you close the door for good, something curious happens. The other starts to see your value exactly when it is already too late. And that is the moment when ego destruction becomes irreversible. This posture is uncomfortable because it breaks a social expectation. That forgiveness means going back to normal. You do not go back. You evolve. You change the route. And that confuses and intimidates those who are used to leading the way. In the end, forgiveness without return is the purest form of emotional dominance. You decide what comes in, what goes out, and you never again let yourself be imprisoned by the fear of losing someone. Calculated absence combined with firm boundaries is what ensures the door stays closed. And once closed, the message is clear. There is no return here. And the most ironic part is that by closing the door to them, you open many others for yourself. New paths, new connections, new experiences free from manipulation. But it takes courage to deal with the initial discomfort. Because silence at first may feel cold even to you. But that cold is the same that preserves your warmth for those who truly deserve it. And those who understand this concept realize, forgiveness is not the end of the story. It is merely the act that sets the stage for a new plot, where you are no longer controlled by toxic people. This is the moment to observe with calm and personal power the effect that this choice produces. And when it manifests, you will understand why you should never reopen that door. The biggest mistake people make when trying to protect themselves is thinking they need to make noise to be respected. They think strategic silence is a sign of weakness, and that only direct confrontation commands respect. But the truth is that the most powerful boundaries are the ones almost no one notices until they feel the impact. You do not need to shout, suddenly block, or cut ties dramatically to protect your space. This often feeds even more into the emotional game of toxic people who thrive on chaos and reaction. What truly disarms them is calculated absence, applied consistently. Subtle boundaries work like an invisible fence. The other person only realizes it exists when they try to cross it and meet resistance. It is in that moment that emotional coldness and self-control speak louder than any heated argument. This subtlety does not mean passivity. On the contrary, it is guilt-free withdrawal, meticulously planned to cut access without having to announce anything. You simply redesign the territory and choose who can step on it, and for how long. The recurring mistake is thinking that setting boundaries requires a dramatic break. In reality, that only exposes your cards. When you maintain emotional control, you avoid giving the other person the exact information about how far they can go to provoke you. Subtle but firm boundaries are the opposite of permissiveness. They leave no room for manipulation. Every gesture, every absence, every unanswered message is a clear statement. Here I decide the access. That is silent authority. Those expecting to see you explode or beg for attention lose their advantage when they encounter an invisible wall. There is no silent humiliation more cruel to the ego of a toxic person than being contained without fuss. The impact is devastating because it undermines the manipulator's personal power. Without knowing exactly where the block is, they start to feel they have lost emotional control of the situation. And when they realize it, it is already too late. Subtle boundaries also have a profound psychological effect. They change the dynamic without the need for lengthy explanations. The other person begins to sense the difference in your behavior and gradually understands that the territory has changed. The key is consistency. There is no point in applying emotional coldness one day and caving in the next. Strategic disappearance, to work, needs to be consistent enough to dismantle the strategies of those who want to test your limits. A well-applied boundary is almost imperceptible to those who do not need to be contained. But for toxic people, it is like a locked door that stubbornly refuses to open, and that erodes the security they once had. Many fall into the trap of trying to teach the other person why they need these boundaries. But that is wasting energy. Self-respect is not explained. It is imposed, even in silence. By maintaining firm boundaries without drama, you protect your personal focus. You prevent your energy from being drained by repetitive conversations, pointless arguments, and manipulation attempts that only wear down your inner strength. Calculated absence, when combined with subtle boundaries, is almost impossible to fight. The other person tries to get closer, but feels that something has changed. There are no invitations, no room for emotional maneuvers. Establishing boundaries like this is more than self-control. It is silent revenge against those who have tried to use you. It is returning manipulation with a weapon that cannot be seen or broken. You do not need to visibly cut ties to protect yourself. You simply withdraw attention at the right moment, ignore attacks, and refuse access without declaring war. This disarms without provoking. People used to being in control react badly to these invisible boundaries. They try to force a reaction, create friction, find a loophole. But the more they try, the more they realize they have no control. Strategic silence is your ally here. It serves as a barrier, as a warning, and as punishment. It not only closes doors, It reinforces that you hold the key and that the key will not be handed over again. This technique requires patience. It is easier to explode or cut things off completely. But those who master the art of setting subtle boundaries build an emotional shield that lasts a lifetime. The secret lies in applying small behavioral changes that, when combined, create an impenetrable wall. It is not a single act. It is an ongoing process that re-educates the other person without saying a word. This also destroys the other person's ego in a slow and painful way. They begin to realize that the free access they once had is gone, but they cannot pinpoint the exact moment when they lost the right to enter. And while they try to figure out what happened, you are already far away, protected, focused on your life, and with strengthened personal power. This is true emotional dominance. In the end, setting subtle but firm boundaries is the most elegant and efficient way to end manipulation. It is guilt-free withdrawal, without noise, but with a devastating effect on those who underestimated your self-respect. When you master this skill, you discover that you do not need shouting or speeches to change the dynamic. You simply hold firm to your decision and let the silence speak for you. And it is precisely in this calculated silence, in this silent authority built without fanfare, that your greatest weapon lies. A weapon that does not wound on the outside, but destroys on the inside. And perhaps the most provocative thing is this: the other person only realizes the magnitude of the loss when they are already on the outside, and the door will never open again. Most people do not understand the power humor can have in an emotional game. While many defend themselves with attacks or with a silence loaded with anger, those who learn to use humor as a shield reach a level of emotional control that disarms even the most experienced manipulators. Toxic people feed on intense reactions: anger, tears, despair. When you respond with lightness and even with a touch of irony, manipulation loses its power. It is as if the game board is flipped and they are left not knowing the next move. Humor, when used with elegance, is a form of strategic silence. It does not shout, it does not accuse, but it sends a clear message: you have no power over me. And that message hits the ego directly. We are not talking about bitter sarcasm or disguised attacks. The true shield is the one that maintains emotional coldness and calculated absence, but adds a touch of lightness that leaves the other person with no reaction. This works because humor breaks the tension the manipulator is trying to create. When they see that they cannot put you into a defensive mode, they feel they have lost emotional control. It is a silent humiliation that is hard to swallow. Imagine someone trying to provoke you, expecting you to explode, but instead you respond with a light joke, deflecting the blow. The attack loses its force. The aggressor feels the hit, not because you struck back, but because you refused to play the game. Humor as a shield is also a form of guilt-free withdrawal. You do not engage with negative energy, you do not feed the drama, and you still keep your personal power intact. The other tries to drag you into the mud, and you respond with a light laugh, not out of mockery, but out of self-sufficiency. This stance is devastating for those who live off manipulation. They rely on the predictability of your reactions to control you. When they realize you do not change, their script loses meaning. The secret is to understand that humor is not just a spontaneous reaction, it is a strategy. It requires self-control, presence of mind, and firm boundaries. It is choosing not to enter the fight, and at the same time not giving up space. By acting this way, you are, in practice, cutting off access. Without realizing it, the other begins to feel they have lost the ability to influence your emotions. And this is ego destruction in slow motion. The most interesting thing is that this technique not only protects you, but also reinforces your silent authority. The other sees that no matter what they do, you maintain your personal focus and do not allow anything to invade your peace. Intelligent humor also generates a powerful side effect. It attracts respect. Those watching see that you have the inner strength not to be affected by provocations. This increases your reputation and diminishes that of those who try to hurt you. Of course, this stance bothers them. People used to controlling hate realizing they no longer have access to your vulnerability. When you respond with lightness, you are in practice closing the door without making noise. The psychological impact is deep. First, They try to persist. Then, they start questioning their own worth. And finally, they realize that the calculated absence you maintain combined with humor is an impossible wall to cross. The emotional game collapses because the fuel runs out. Without reaction, there is no drama. Without drama, there is no control. Without control, the manipulator is lost, and the power dynamic reverses. This technique also protects your personal focus. By not getting involved in unnecessary conflicts, you preserve energy to invest in yourself, your goals, and the people who truly deserve your attention. Humor as a shield is in fact a form of silent revenge. It shows that you not only survived the attack, but that it did not leave a single mark on you. And this, for the ego of a toxic person, is unbearable. Because they want to see you shaken, and what they get is a light, impenetrable response. It is like trying to break a wall with a breath. The use of humor requires practice. At first, you may feel the urge to respond more harshly, but over time you realize this approach is more effective and more elegant than any emotional outburst. This is the essence of emotional dominance: knowing when to speak, how to speak, and most importantly, how not to let yourself be caught in the other's emotional traps. Strategic silence and humor together form a lethal combination against manipulation. They not only close doors, they lock them with a golden key, without the other person realizing when it happened. The result is that you keep your boundaries firm, preserve your inner strength, and prevent the other from ever regaining any power over your life. And perhaps the most provocative thing about this technique is this: while they try to understand how they lost, you continue on your path, light, intact, and unreachable. Every manipulation needs an audience. Without a reaction, it dies. Toxic people build an emotional script where you are the character who reacts, defends yourself, and explains. But the moment you refuse to enter the game, the plot loses its meaning. The most common mistake is believing you need to win the argument. But winning is not convincing. It is not participating. It is turning strategic silence into an impenetrable barrier that suffocates any attempt at manipulation. When you change the subject, ignore attacks, and cut off access, the manipulator feels the emotional coldness as a direct blow to the ego. They do not know how to deal with calculated absence because they depend on drama to stay in control. This refusal is more than guilt-free withdrawal. It is the slow-motion destruction of the other's ego. They expect you to step into the arena, but all they find is a closed door. And nothing wounds a controller's pride more than being ignored. The emotional game only exists if there is someone to play it. When you do not react, justify, or defend yourself, the manipulator finds themselves alone on stage. And there is no show without an audience. This requires emotional mastery. It is resisting the urge to respond in kind, to put in their place the one who attacks you. It is understanding that every response is fuel to prolong their game. Refusing to play is not passivity. It is strategy. You choose your battles and decide that you will not waste inner strength on those who do not deserve it. It is personal power in its purest form. Silence in this context is not emptiness. It is silent revenge. It is a message that says, "I am not available for your script." This provokes a silent humiliation that corrodes more than any direct confrontation. When you break the cycle, the other person enters silent desperation. First, they try to provoke more. Then they increase the intensity of the attacks. And when nothing works, they begin to feel they have lost emotional control. This is the moment when calculated absence becomes a wall. With every ignored attempt at contact, with every deflected conversation, you are reinforcing firm boundaries without having to raise your voice. Make no mistake, toxic people hate losing control. But the most painful thing for them is not losing. It is losing without having a way to blame you. When you do not react, there is no opening to distort your stance. This guilt-free withdrawal also protects your personal focus. Without getting involved in drama, you have more energy to invest in yourself, your goals, and the relationships that truly matter. Refusing the game is cutting off emotional access. You're not just disappearing strategically, you are changing the rules without warning. This leaves the other confused and insecure, and this insecurity is the beginning of ego destruction, because the controller realizes they no longer set the pace. They no longer decide when you speak or what you speak about. They have lost the silent authority they thought they had over you. The most provocative thing is that by refusing to play, you not only break the current cycle, you prevent it from repeating in the future. The other understands, even if unconsciously, that there is no more space for manipulation. Of course, this requires consistency. A single impulsive reaction can give the manipulator the false sense that they can still get to you. That is why it is essential to maintain your stance firmly. This firmness is not about unnecessary coldness, but about self-control. It is knowing that you do not need to shout to be respected. That true respect is born from clear boundaries and from not selling yourself for emotional scraps. Refusing the game also sends a powerful message. You are not afraid of absence. While the manipulator fears losing control, you show that you can live perfectly well without their presence. The psychological effect is devastating. Without your reaction, the toxic person loses the foundation of the game. There is no more argument to exploit, no opening to penetrate. All that remains is emptiness. And this emptiness is unbearable for those who depend on control. It is proof that your personal power is unbreakable and that there is nothing the other can do to get it back. Strategic silence here is not just defense, it is attack. It is the weapon that ends the game before it even starts. And anyone who has tried to manipulate knows, when the other does not engage, there is no possible victory. You do not need to prove anything. Your refusal is the proof. Every non-reaction is a reminder that you are in control, that the stage is no longer theirs, that the script is over. And the moment they realize there is no more show, the most painful part comes. The certainty that there will be no new season. This is the true end of the emotional game. Not because you won an argument, but because you simply did not play. And that, for the manipulator's ego, is the most humiliating defeat possible. It is not escape. It is liberation. There is a huge difference between disappearing to avoid confrontation and stepping away to preserve your peace. When you step away with firmness, without justifications, you send a silent message. Access is over, and there are no negotiations. Most people feel guilt when cutting off access. They are trained to believe that protecting themselves is selfish. But the truth is that there is nothing more valuable than your inner peace, and any tie that threatens that must be re-evaluated. Guilt-free withdrawal is not about punishment. It is about taking emotional control and preventing toxic people from continuing to drain your energy. It is a calculated absence that closes doors forever. Over-explaining is opening cracks. Those who want to manipulate will use your words against you. When you simply step away without speeches, you reinforce firm boundaries without offering targets for attacks. This firmness is part of silent revenge. Not because you want to hurt, but because the simple act of not being available destroys the ego of those who thought they were in control. Guilt disappears when you understand that preserving your peace is worth more than maintaining any tie. This is self-respect in action. It is guilt-free withdrawal, sustained by inner strength and personal focus. Many confuse withdrawal with unnecessary coldness, but it is not about ignoring out of whim. It is about withdrawing attention from those who have proven they do not deserve space in your life. Firm withdrawal is also a strategic disappearance. There is no date to return, because there is no intention to return. It is the definitive end of the emotional game. Toxic people hate this strategy. They depend on reaction, explanation, and drama to keep manipulation alive. When you cut all of that off, control slips through their fingers. This is the time to maintain strategic silence. It is not just the absence of words, it is the presence of your personal power. It shows that you control the situation without having to wear yourself out. Firm withdrawal also prevents relapses. Without contact, there is no temptation to fall back into old dynamics. And every day apart is another layer of armor against manipulation. This stance requires self-control. It is resisting the need to justify every step. It is accepting that those who deserve to know your reasons already know, and those who do not deserve it do not need to know. Step away with inner clarity. Decide mentally that this move is not temporary. It is a conscious decision to protect your firm boundaries and your silent authority. The immediate consequence is the collapse of the manipulator's narrative. They can no longer paint you as unstable or reactive. Your calculated absence is proof that you are no longer trapped in the emotional game. Guilt-free withdrawal also sends a message to yourself. You are the priority. By putting yourself first, you break the cycle of giving to those who do not give back. This choice does not need to be announced. The impact is greater when the other realizes on their own that you are no longer accessible, and that there is nothing they can do to change that. This is the true destruction of the ego, realizing that the power of return is no longer in their hands. And this does not happen with shouting or confrontations, but with the serenity of someone who has already decided. When applying this strategy, it is important not to give in to emotional pressure. Toxic people may fake change, make promises, or even appeal to guilt. But every return is a step backward. Stand firm. Withdrawal is not to teach the other. It is to protect you. If there is learning on their side, great. But that is not the goal. When you step away without guilt, you experience true freedom. The emotional weight lifts, the constant noise disappears, and the silence creates space to rebuild your inner strength. Distance also reveals who truly cares. Those who value your presence respect your boundaries. Those who don't respect them prove that your absence was the best choice you could have made. This is a strategy that doesn't rely on momentary courage, but on consistency. Every time you keep your distance, you strengthen your personal power and your silent authority. And the most controversial part of this stance is that it challenges the narrative that family, friendship, or love forgives everything. No, not everything is forgiven. And even when there is forgiveness, it doesn't mean the door needs to be reopened. Step away with firmness and watch how control shifts sides. You stop being the easy target and become the unreachable point. The emotional game ends when one of the players stands up and walks away. In the end, it's not escape, it's choice. A choice that says more about your strength than any speech ever could. And those who want to understand it can do so from a distance. Every time you talk about, complain about, or expose someone who hurt you, you are, without realizing it, feeding that person's presence in your life. It's like keeping a ghost alive even after deciding you want it gone. Attention is fuel, and manipulators know it. Toxic people can't survive without an audience. They need you to react, mention them, criticize them. Any sign that they are still on your mind is a reminder that they still hold power over you. That's where strategic silence comes in. Not giving them a stage is more than just ignoring them. It's cutting off access, removing attention entirely, closing the door and throwing away the key. It's making calculated absence the poison that eats away at their ego. When you stop speaking, their narrative loses strength. There is no more fuel for the emotional game. And without that game, the controller finds themselves alone, without an audience to validate their manipulations. The most ironic part is that the less you speak, the more they speak. They try to provoke, spread stories, seek reactions, but each failed attempt is a silent humiliation that cuts deep. This is the essence of emotional coldness. It's not loud revenge, it's silent revenge. It's destroying the other person's relevance in your world to the point where they realize they are no longer a topic, no longer a priority, no longer anything. Calculated absence has a devastating effect. First comes the unease. Why aren't they saying anything? Then the insecurity, do I no longer matter to them? And finally, the pain. They've truly moved on. And in this process, emotional control is entirely in your hands. You decide where to place your personal focus and inner strength. The other person stops being the center and becomes an irrelevant point in your landscape. Not giving them a stage is also self-protection. Talking about those who weaken you keeps the energetic bond alive. You think about them, spend energy, relive emotions, and all of this blocks your liberation. By withdrawing your attention, you're not just avoiding exhaustion. You are sending a clear message: you no longer have space here. And that message, spoken in silence, is far more powerful than any speech. The manipulator hates emptiness. When they can't get your reaction, they start to feel the loss of power. Absence is a slow but irreversible destruction of the ego. They realize they can no longer control you. This is withdrawal without guilt. It's not about being cold or cruel. It's about self-respect and firm boundaries. It's recognizing that you don't need to keep alive the presence of those who only weaken you. When you close the door and don't look back, you begin to truly breathe. You feel the weight disappear, the focus return, the energy renew, and you realize you've always been the one in control. Not giving them a stage is like extinguishing a fire. Without fuel, the flame dies. And in the silence, you realize that emotional freedom doesn't come from defeating the other person, but from not allowing them to exist in your space. This strategic silence deeply unsettles them. People used to having control expect a reaction. When they don't get one, they lose direction. And this loss of control is the reflection of the emotional dominance that now belongs to you. Calculated absence becomes even more powerful when paired with a strategic disappearance. Not being physically or digitally present reinforces that there is no longer space for contact. This stance requires self-control. The urge to respond, explain, or defend yourself is natural. But every time you resist, you increase your silent authority and diminish the manipulator's power. And here's the most controversial part. Talking about what hurt you may be necessary to process it. But turning it into a habit is giving a stage to what should be dead. The cut needs to be final. Not giving a stage is also about protecting your image. When you don't mention, don't complain, and don't victimize yourself, you keep your posture intact. And that makes the other person seem small and insecure. The psychological impact on them is brutal. They realize that no matter what they do, they won't get from you the reaction they need to keep existing in your life. And the most curious thing is that when they realize they are no longer remembered, some try to get close again. But that's when your firm boundaries come into action to block any return. Not giving a stage to what weakens you is more than an attitude. It's an emotional survival strategy. It's preventing your mental and emotional space from being occupied by those who don't deserve it. In the end, you discover that silence, far from being empty, is fertile ground. It's where you rebuild your personal power, strengthen your inner strength, and free yourself once and for all from the emotional game. And for them, your absence is a poison that corrodes slowly day after day, until nothing remains of the control they once thought they had over you. Closing the door is just the first step. True liberation begins when you decide you won't spend a single second feeding someone who has already lost the right to be in your life. What truly destroys their power over you is complete focus on your own growth. While they try to decipher your strategic silence, you move forward. And nothing is more corrosive to someone's ego than watching, powerless, the person they lost prosper, rebuild, and flourish beyond their reach. Personal focus becomes your armor. It prevents manipulation, provocations, and contact attempts from finding space to enter. When your attention is on your progress, the emotional game dies of starvation. This stance is the most sophisticated form of silent revenge. There are no confrontations, no accusations, only visible results. And each of your achievements is a silent humiliation for those who believed that without them, you wouldn't go far. Calculated absence already hurts, but when it comes with visible evolution, the impact is devastating. You not only withdrew attention, but also proved you don't need them for anything. Toxic people hate losing emotional control, but what truly destroys them is realizing that you not only survived, but are better than ever. This is ego destruction in its purest form. Focus as armor requires firm boundaries. It's resisting the curiosity to know what the other is doing. It's cutting off access to information that could distract you and keeping your full attention on your own path. It's not just about strategic disappearance. It's about building, day after day, a life so solid that any attempt to return finds no space to take root. Focus is also the ultimate cure for guilt. You understand that protecting your peace and investing in yourself is not selfishness, it's self-respect. And that understanding seals the door you've already closed. Every step you take in your growth is a silent reminder to the other person. Access is over, and nothing they do will change that. They can try to provoke, spread rumors, or even fake regret. All of it is useless. Focusing on growth transforms your energy. You stop wasting strength trying to explain or prove and start investing in what really matters. This increases your inner strength and reinforces your silent authority. The manipulator lives off attention. When you channel all of yours into your projects, goals, and personal evolution, their game ceases to exist. No stage, no audience, no control. This change is not just emotional, it's practical. You start filling your time with habits, people, and experiences that feed your personal power and shield you from manipulation. And the most provocative part is that you don't have to show anything directly. News of your progress reaches them somehow, and every detail is a painful reminder that they lost their chance. Here's the full translation into English, keeping the exact same structure and tone. This is the stage where silent humiliation turns into a constant reality. They live with the image of you thriving and with the certainty that they no longer have a place in your life. Using focus as armor also means ignoring attacks, hints, and provocations. You understand that responding would give a stage to what weakens you, and you prefer to invest in what strengthens you. This is not just detachment without guilt. It is absolute emotional mastery. You decide where your energy goes, and that decision is what keeps the other person trapped in their own impotence. While they wait for a reaction, you build. While they look for openings, you raise walls. While they feed off the past, you create the future. The psychological impact on them is unbearable. There is no greater pain to someone's ego than to watch, powerless, the prosperity of the person they swore wouldn't have the strength to move forward. And you don't need to do anything to provoke this reaction. The simple act of advancing in silence with consistency is enough for the poison of absence to corrode more and more. In the end, focus as armor is not just about defeating the other. It's about defeating yourself. It's choosing every day not to go back, not to look back, and not to give space to those who once tried to control you. When this decision becomes non-negotiable, no manipulation can get through. Your energy is shielded, your peace is protected, and your life moves toward something far greater than any emotional game. You've made it this far, and now you understand what few have the courage to apply. Strategic silence is not absence, it is emotional dominance. Closing the door is not weakness, it is personal power in its purest form. And when that door is closed with firm boundaries, emotional coldness, and calculated absence, there is no return for them. Everything we've talked about so far, refusing the emotional game, cutting access, maintaining distance without guilt, using humor as a shield, not giving a stage to what weakens you, and shielding yourself with personal focus, converges on a single point. The control of your life is in your hands, and no one else will decide your worth. What destroys the manipulator is not your anger. It's not your response, it's your absence. It's the fact that while they try to understand why you disappeared, you move forward, grow, and thrive. And every step you take is a silent humiliation that corrodes their ego. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You don't need to explain, justify, or convince. Your victory is your silence, and your proof is your evolution. Toxic people survive on an audience, and when you take it away, they collapse. And that is something they will never recover from. Now, the question that remains for you is, how many more times will you allow someone to come back into your life, weaken your peace, and test your boundaries before you close the door for good? The answer is not for me, it's for you. And it defines whether from today on, you continue to be the easy target of emotional games, or if you fully take on the role of protagonist of your own story. So, if this message made sense to you, and you want to keep learning practical, direct, and powerful strategies to protect your peace and strengthen your self-respect, subscribe to the channel now. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos, because each lesson we bring here is another piece to shield your life against manipulation, silent humiliation, and ego destruction caused by others. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone trapped in a toxic relationship, being manipulated, or emotionally drained, share this video. This could be the turning point they've been waiting for to finally close the door and never look back. Silence is the most underestimated weapon there is, and the day you learn to use it, you'll realize you no longer need to shout to be heard, and that when you close the door, the only key is in your hands. The next move is yours.